watching a wonderful little presentation that's a few years old about, well, the DLC of Trespasser from Dragon Age Inquisition, and everyone who knows this is kind of like, hey, this is like the patch to make the ending work, or a ending to exist within the Dragon Age Inquisition
You
experience.
didn't want an ending DLC, didn't you? You're the one that put that in BioWare's mind.
It's like, hey, maybe we should actually make a story. Oh, right, that's what we do at BioWare. We write stories with our games. Or maybe,
Endings?
yeah.
What are these?
Making Dragon Age games. Just keep going. And hopefully someone will patch it later in DLC. It's like, thanks, that's great. It's the business model nowadays. So, let's see what we got here. Ready to go? Let's go.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. We're going to get started. So welcome to our talk, Building to an Emotional Theme.
I am Patrick Weeks. I've been a writer at BioWare since about 2005. I wrote on the Mass Effect trilogy, including the Lair of the Shadow Broker DLC that's downloadable content for Mass Effect 2, as well as, well, thank you, as well as Leviathan and the Citadel for Mass Effect 3. And after moving over to the Dragon Age franchise for Dragon Age Inquisition, I wrote for that. And after Dave Gator, our lead writer, moved on to another project, I became the lead writer for the Dragon Age franchise moving forward.
And I'm John Epler. I started at BioWare in 2007 as a term tester on Sonic Chronicles, became a cinematic designer on Dragon Age 2, and worked on Inquisition, all the DLC, eventually becoming the narrative presentation lead on Dragon Age Inquisition, or the Dragon Age franchise going forward. So,
Nice
if it helps, a lead writer, if this were a movie...
Sorry, what was it?
Nice credentials. I worked on Sonic and I worked on the cinematics for Dragon Age. Good. We've got some quality.
movie, I would be the screenwriter and John would be the director.
And it requires a lot of collaboration and iteration between the two of us. We work exceptionally closely together. So how can we help you with this talk? Well, we're known by and large for large character-driven interactive narratives. We generally try to make people feel things and occasionally succeed. And we can show you our process for doing so. So hopefully you'll come out of this with a better understanding of how we come up with our narratives and develop them. Now, a lot of vague examples and principles aren't going to be as much help as giving you something concrete to attach those to. So we decided we'd talk about the process we used to build the Dragon Age Inquisition Trespasser DLC. Now, as a warning, this was our final piece of DLC, so there are going to be spoilers in this talk if you haven't played it.
So before we jump into the Trespasser DLC, for those of you who haven't played Dragon Age Inquisition, or for those of you for whom it's been a couple of years, over the course of Dragon Age Inquisition, you started by helping to form the Inquisition, an organization devoted to restoring order in a world that was under threat and in chaos. After proving yourself, you became the Inquisitor, leader of the Inquisition. That was at least in part due to a mark on your hand that gave you the power to banish demons, a mark that some people thought meant that you were the chosen.
Did these
At
people
the end
like
of
play a
Inquisition,
different game? Because that's not what happened at all. Like, you didn't found the Inquisition. Cassandra did that. You only became the Inquisitor because there was no actual real reason. That you did nothing that elevated you above Cassandra, Josephine, or even who's the Templar's name now? I've forgotten his name.
Cullen,
that's the dude. Like, you did nothing. You just, it was just insert name protagonist, and that was it. We need the protagonist to move the plot forward. You know.
Well, I mean, they're not completely wrong. Everyone sort of just went along with you being in charge, even though you didn't actually do anything. So it's assumed you did everything. It's like, yeah, you're the guy. Yeah, of course. No one knows the difference anyway. They're not paying attention.
you saved the world, restored order, and you turned...
Restored some order. You got it.
There we go.
Can't
What
get that
order
wrong.
was restored?
Yes.
It's,
Regular
it's like-
service has resumed.
yeah. Well, the thing is, though, the world got set back to condition zero. In other words, nothing actually changed. It just, like, it's not like Dragon Age Origins where Ferelden's recuperating from the blight, or, like, you know, Origins and Dragon Age 2, for their faults, were actually just independent stories. This is actually spanning over continents, but you're not really a major power because you're not seizing land, because you never really had the capacity to seize land, or the authority to seize land, did you, or anything like that? There wasn't like a...
It was like a showcase of taking land. It wasn't official. It's just
Yeah.
like, hey, I'm going to put this piece of iron into the ground, and now it's mine. It's like, no, no.
Turn the Inquisition into a major world power. Also, we left you with one big dangling plot thread in the form of Soulless, your follower, friend, possibly even lover, leaving the Inquisition and being revealed as possibly the elven trickster god Fen'Harel.
And by plot thread, they mean the stinger at the end of the credits. This is after the fact. The story is over. We'll just throw this thing in there.
Yeah, right. What was the original story became the DLC. Well, not necessarily that, but the opening for the DLC, which is, if anyone actually remembers all of the pre-marketing material that they did, it was all about the Fade invading, or the Veil, sorry, being ripped asunder, and that was the big thing. And none of that happened. Instead, it was just, it's solved in the first act. The big breach of the skies, that's solved. It's Corey the Crackhead and his merry band of Venatori that you have to stop now.
Pretty much, yeah.
So we had that as our baseline going into Trespasser, which means we had a very specific set of goals for Trespasser. We needed to wrap up the Inquisitor's story, and as Patrick mentioned, you had the mark on your hand. That made you the Inquisitor. We needed to remove that. We needed to take away the thing that made you this figurehead in the world. So conclusively tie up that protagonist story.
When they remove Shepard's Prothean visions, Inspector status, the things that make you special. All right. Fair enough.
Yeah, the thing that everyone called around to you was your magical mark, and now you don't really use it.
Yeah. Once again, resetting everything back to condition 0. Thanks.
We needed to set up the future of the franchise. We had a lot. The Dragon Age franchise has a lot of moving parts, a lot of narrative elements, some of which we didn't really bring in Inquisition. We wanted to bring those back, put them back on the table. So
in a DLC, we're going to set up the future of the franchise. Maybe I should
It's
have
the
done
bridging DLC.
Maybe they should have done that in the actual game. No. We'll do the business model right now. Okay.
we had Illuvians, magic mirrors that let you travel long distances. We had the Qunari, an invading force from across the sea that hates magic. And we had the Ancient Elves, one of our franchise's biggest unsolved mysteries. They were a massive empire thousands of years ago that collapsed suddenly, and there's not a lot of history that really tells you why. We also wanted to do all this while emotionally engaging the players, or as we like to call it, giving you the feels. So how do we do?
Well, judging by the reactions on the highly scientific Reddit Dragon Age Trespasser reactions mega thread, we found that players were very interested, and they felt that this was the ending that they were looking for. They did get the closure they wanted.
Okay, if you're a writer or an author, and if you read a sentence like that, that's the kind of thing you back away from. If someone comes up to you in a crowd and starts screaming at you, "This is perfect! It's amazing!" It's like, no, it's not. No piece of writing is perfect. No story ending is final. When you publish something, whether it's a YouTube video or a story or a piece of software, there's always something wrong with it, and you do your best you can with the time you're given. So to see this and to actually write this down on a presentation is like, okay, no sane writer or creator would do this. This is not how you evaluate your own work, by looking at someone giving you ultimate praise. So
They were emotionally invested in the possibility of hypothetical future games in the franchise.
they're fanboys. They'll say anything. Give them a pile of shit. Wow, it's Dragon Age. Look at that.
Yeah, because one of the things that, sorry if I'm repeating myself here, but Dragon Age is never really been about world-changing events. It's been about localized things. Like Origins was about the Blight, which was strictly in Ferelden. Dragon Age 2 was mostly in Kirkwall, was it? Was that?
Yeah.
But these are all just localized areas. But because they decided to go larger than geographic, It's just they've got themselves they wrote themselves into a hole. Like they got like this world changing event and they doubled back on it and went like, oh, hang on, maybe we can't do that, because then what would happen afterwards, you know? So that's probably the reason why. But they could have done Corypheus in a new wave of blight. Like this is a different blight that's been coming up or something. Like it's not led by an archdemon. Like we got the architect out of Awakenings, which gave us a lot of insight into the Darkspawn themselves. Or even indeed, we could have actually even seen the resurrection of the Tevinter gods themselves being woken from the slumber, but not in an archdemon-like form. There's many possibilities that they could have done, but they refused to. In fact, they even refused to acknowledge those things for some reason.
This is the ironic thing, is that the whole character of Corypheus came from DLC, from the previous games.
Yeah.
And now here we have DLC, which is going to be the basis of the next game. This is ridiculous.
And we brung the feels.
I just can't fathom this. It's like, we were dramatic. We did drama well. It's like, you did? Really? Okay. All these peaks and valleys in the dramatic structure. Like, wow. Bravo. You can give us a reason to give a crap. People have feelings. Yeah, you express them on the page. Oh, okay.
So how did we do that? We do that through a process, and the process of building to an emotional theme starts with vision. For us, vision is setting a shared target, something that everyone on the team can agree with as a goal that you are all going to work toward.
That's called the plot.
That's called anything. It's like,
Yeah.
We're going to build a cake. All right, guys. Is it going to have sugar? Yes, we all agree it's going to have sugar. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So what are we making? A game. Right. So we're all agreeing that we're making a computer game, even though we are a computer game developer.
Do you know writers have to write drama? Yeah, great idea. Good. Okay, right.
But we're writers? Oh my God.
Whoa, we use pencils and pens and paper. Ooh.
Next up is critique, and now getting everything in the game as playable as early as possible is hugely important, because then everyone can give you feedback, look at the vision, and figure out where we're missing the vision or where we're not quite getting where we need to be.
From the critique, you move into revision. Revision gets you closer to your target. That's its goal. That's its only goal. Are you getting closer to the vision that you set at the start of the project?
No.
And now there's a fourth step, which is
completely changed the plot. Dragon Age Inquisition had a completely different plot from the alpha that we got showed off, and it was completely different. So no, you didn't get closer to the plot. You jumped away from the plot with a big pole vault.
Right, but here they're talking about their own unique DLC stories.
Yeah.
So I mean, this method is fine. It's just that it works on top of a thing which should have had this thing in it already. So
yeah, this should have actually been this should have been part of the actual main game, but for some reason, I don't know. I guess that's the reason why I'm a bit more bitter, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. If this was like like the denouement, we're thinking, oh, it's all over, and all of a sudden, boom.
Yeah,
Soulless is going to piss you off. Like, what? And then that would have been fantastic, because the whole process of this was a joke. Corypheus was a joke. And then to suddenly say, nope, it's really been me all this time. That's called a twist. That would have worked. And then there's like a whole other game after that, which is the whole DLC experience. Then we said, wow, you totally gave us more content than we were expecting, because your first story was shit. And now this one actually has some substance. So
it is necessary. You're very rarely going to hit your vision on the first try. And repeating the process over and over again gets you closer and closer to that vision. Now,
so let's talk about vision.
Yes, let's talk about vision. Patrick?
To create a vision, the first thing you do is set up your broad goals. These are the functional objectives, what you need to accomplish over the course of the piece of content you're looking for. The next thing you do after you've got your broad goals is figure out appropriate references. Now, to be clear, these appropriate references can be a movie, it can be a television show, a graphic novel, anything that anyone can use.
Places to
So what are our
avoid:
broad goals?
Tumblr, DeviantArt, any blog.
let's just see what their creative inspiration was. Let's find out. This is funny.
Trespasser. Well, we touched on them a little bit earlier, but we needed to learn the truth about Soulless. You, as the player, knew Soulless was Fen'Harel, but that was a cutaway. That was a moment that the Inquisitor had not seen. So we needed to tie the Inquisitor's knowledge and the player's knowledge together.
That
We needed to do
kind of. I don't like this idea of the player having more knowledge than the player character, because it kind of, to me anyway, this is me personally, it ruins the tension. It's like when the show Lost came out a while ago, because we had more knowledge than the characters interacting with one another, because the characters weren't talking to one another, it just became frustrating, because just like, all you have to do is say something to that one person and all these things could have been avoided, you know.
Well, this is the ending of a stinger, so they're working on different narrative devices. So he is correct; he has to patch it up. But why they wanted it to be a cinematic experience as opposed to a gaming experience, I don't know. It's kind of weird.
this while giving you a sense of wonder about this ancient world, this ancient empire that had existed and fallen, and a sense of melancholy because one of your potentially closest allies was no longer going to be on your side.
Or boyfriend.
Or boyfriend. Closest boyfriend. Maybe not only boyfriend, but... And we needed to show the Inquisition had been infiltrated, which is to say, we needed to show that the organization had gotten so big and so ponderous that you no longer had direct control over most of it.
You never had control over it anyway. You never had control over diplomacy. You never had control over your armies. You basically got told where to go for the most of your time. So, yes, you had no control over it. He is right.
Yeah, there's no micromanagement of the Inquisition. You're just the guy who goes yes or no. Or
You
one
are
of
the
three
child
flavors.
king.
Yeah, pretty much.
Forces from within and without were corrupting it and twisting it into something it no longer resembled what it had been at the beginning. Which is to say, we needed to show you that simple solutions aren't. Just because you're the biggest kid on the block now doesn't mean you can do whatever you want. And honestly, maybe you shouldn't be the biggest kid on the block.
So once you have those broad goals, like I said, the next step is to figure out your appropriate references. Now, the first step in an appropriate reference, the first qualification, is it has to be intuitive. It has to be something that everyone understands. If I'm talking about this movie, I know what it means, and I immediately see how that applies to the piece of content we're making.
Now, intuitive is important. This is a great example of a scene that's been replicated in other movies. The original Battleship Potemkin is something not a lot of people have seen. So if you're referencing it, maybe choose something that's a little bit more common. Unless you're going to take everyone out to the theater to see it, it needs to be something everyone can get immediately and intuitively.
This is very strange. I mean, there's nothing wrong with deriving themes and ideas from pre-existing art, but he's talking about movies. This cannot work within a fantasy setting in another world. So I'm not sure what he's getting at here.
Second, it has to be inspirational. It's not enough that people recognize what you're using. If you're using this movie reference or that book, they have to see, oh, okay, if we're using that I remember this one fantastic scene in that movie. We should have a scene that kind of works to create the same feeling, and I bet here's how we do it. It has to make people want to use it. I will also add that there is a third thing we are not saying here. It doesn't actually have to be an objectively good piece of content. If I could segue for a brief moment, for Mass Effect 3's final DLC, The Citadel, in the final mission, you are retaking your Commander Shepard, and you are retaking your starship, the Normandy, from your evil clone. It made sense at the time. Our appropriate reference, our vision for that particular mission was Air Force One meets Face Off. Get off my plane meets which one of us is the real Castor Troy. These are not actually good movies in my personal opinion.
You know what's really funny about the Shepard clone thing? I was like, he can go to his clone. It's like, Shepard had cybernetic implants, right? And that's how you could identify him or her. A clone's just an organic copy. They're not going to have the same implants.
This is true. And
so it's like, how do we know which one's the real one? Well, Shepard just like pulls his arm apart like Terminator. And just goes, now you listen very close.
Well, what he's saying is actually true. You don't have to pick a good or a bad example. What you do is you take the idea from that example and you make it your own. And that means that it doesn't matter what is out there. So long as you have the skill to make something better, go for it. But if you don't, then you better choose something good, because you're gonna suck at writing if you don't do it properly.
Yeah, it's the idea of tropes and things like that. It's not the fact that it's a trope; it's the fact that whether or not the person has means to make it good, through their craft, whether it be a writer, a director, and things like that. Yeah.
Everyone on the project knew, okay, on that mission, that's what we're doing. These are the emotions we are going to convey.
And it's important to note that, as Patrick said, good is subjective, not objective, because
He said it was objective.
I think those are both fantastic movies. There are a few things Harrison Ford has done in his recent career better than Get Off My Plane, so just saying. So for reference, we decided we needed two things, ancient mythology and an organization that had been infiltrated. Now, this is a reference that even if you haven't seen the movie, it's become so ingrained in popular culture, it's an easy reference to go to. Indiana Jones finds the truth behind the Ark, opens it, a bunch of Nazis get their faces melted off. Great. That is a strong visual and one that pretty much everyone's going to get.
Now, for the second part of this, an organization that had been devoted to good being corrupted from within by organizational overreach and infiltration by an external force, we went to the at the time recent movie, Captain America, the Winter Soldier, because what S.H.I.E.L.D. went through with the agents of Hydra, as well as its own good intentions, worked together to tell that the kind of story that we said, okay, that is the kind of story we want for Inquisition. So if you put Raiders of the Lost Ark plus Captain America meets the Winter Soldier, that gets us our overall vision. Now, that was the vision for Trespasser as a whole. If it makes sense, this is the macro level. This is the entirety of the DLC.
Why didn't they do this for the main game? Like, really? Like, this...
Yeah.
Did they just have this idea after the fact? Oh, we made a shitty story. Let's actually do it right this time.
Yeah. They probably sat there in the room and they were like, the game shipped. It's gone gold. It's out. Oh, right. And they still got like story things on the board, and they're like, oh, is that for the DLC? Yeah, totally. It's totally for the DLC, guys. It's great.
You can also use visions for things at the micro level. Once you have this overall vision, you can go, okay, if that's the vision for the whole thing, what's the vision for this one dungeon? What's the vision for this one conversation, for this one scene? And that's what gets you a consistency of vision and a consistency of emotional theme across your entire content.
If you're pulling different references from different movies and things like that in the same, let's say, line of succession of conversations, that's kind of inconsistent to me.
It's difficult. I mean, you can do this, but you really have to know what you're doing. You can't just say, okay, it's like this movie, but that movie with this element, with this theme, with this character. It's like, okay, how are you going to make a dramatic structure out of that? How are you going to make dialogue? How are you going to have personality? It's hard, but you can do it. It's just the more elements you throw together, the harder it is. The more themes, the more genres, the more scenes. You're just going to have this mishmash of ideas until you flatten it out into something that resembles something that you're going to write, because now you're just stealing from other people and just kind of quilting everything together. And unless you smash it down to work with your story and your characters, you're going to get a mishmash.
But here's the thing, though: was the Inquisition actually corrupted? I never remember it being corrupted.
There was an elf. I
Yeah.
think.
Okay. See, so there's one person. The entire organization must be purged because there's one. It's like saying we must basically nuke Redcliffe from orbit because Jowen was teaching Connor blood magic or something like that. You know.
Well, they do their best.
I mean,
They had the element; it just wasn't expressed very well.
I guess, yeah, I can understand the idea of when the Terry Pratchett. They're going for the idea of what Terry Pratchett says is that when you're writing a certain genre, it's best to read outside of that genre to give you perspective. You know, that's good, because if you just, let's say, focus on science fiction all the time, then you can kind of get lost within it. So you need to read outside of the material that you're working with. But if you just sat there watching movies, I mean, I remember actually this was on the Andromeda panel. They were like, "Oh yeah, some of our inspiration came from the new Star Trek movies," and I just went, "Oh no, you're using J.J. Abrams as a reference. God help us."
Now, for Trespasser, the biggest scene in the entire DLC was meeting Soulless. You have to get to answer some questions. It was our equivalent of Indiana Jones opening an ark full of feelings instead of face-melting ghosts. Face melting is a feeling, but not one we generally try to go for. So we needed to do a few things. As mentioned, we needed to remove your hand. We needed to take away the source of your power, of your authority as the Inquisitor, of the thing that made you marked by the divine. We needed to answer some questions we brought up in the main game. There were a lot of things that, hanging plot threads we left at the end of DAI that we needed to wrap up. And we needed to give players who loved, hated, or just really didn't care about Soulless one way or the other a strong emotional payoff. So how do we do?
Okay, so they neutered the actual character. They pretty much did garbage collection on the plots that they didn't bother to write. And then they had to rewrite Soulless over again, because now all of a sudden he's this new character. So
Yeah, he's revealed himself. It's like, well, okay.
About Soulless one way or the other a strong emotional payoff. So how do we do? Honestly, largely successful in that scene. This, to be clear, is the best case scenario. This happens rarely enough, but if you have an extremely strong vision, you can get there. If you look at the concept art in the previous slide, and then the actual scene in game, they're pretty close. And that's because we boarded this scene like crazy right at the beginning of the project.
So BioWare can write storyboards and then take them to a cinematic designer and then kind of go, can you copy this into game form? And then they can do it. They're like, yes, we can. Congratulations, BioWare. You've done what Mass Effect 1 did like ages ago.
you do what game designers do with storyboards. Bravo.
Yeah.
It was a consistent target for the rest of the DLC. This is also important. You have something that you know is going to change very little. Everything else in the DLC, all the plot threads before this scene and all the plot threads after this scene, tied back to this scene in one way or another. So it let us answer a lot of questions early without having to rebuild this scene from the ground up.
Now, if I could jump in for a minute before you change to the next slide. I think it's worth pointing out here that even in scenes where everything goes well, there are still tweaks.
People are pointing out in the chat, you weren't marked by the divine, you were just marked by accident. So there was nothing divine about you, it's just people believed you were divine, but you never had the option to actually address that was in the game whatsoever.
It was never a gameplay mechanic, it was never a lore part where you had to like stress the fact that you could mention it, but it didn't change anything. And that was such a wasted opportunity to work with the social aspect of being a leader of a religious order and how that could have changed the landscape, how people could have flocked to you. But there was no flocking, there was no gaining an army. You just had the army. It was just there.
Yeah. That had an unspecified number of soldiers that you always seemed to have. And there was no recruitment problems. Like if you were losing campaigns or something, you'd have recruitment problems because people are like, yeah, we don't want to join with those guys because everyone's getting massed. You know, there's nothing in there. And even the bit where the bit where you take out the Grey Wardens, which is insulting, that was one of the most insulting things because you play Origins. And then Hawk kind of goes, you come out of the Fade and you kind of go, I'm not chosen, I'm not his things. And Hawk kind of goes, they need this. And you just kind of go, okay, seeing over, move on. And he's like, oh, you buggery dudes.
Let's just kill characters. It's dramatic. It's the feels are there.
I remember actually when, because in my playthrough I had Alistair as the Grey Warden by accident because it was a mess of him. And it was a choice between Hawk and Alistair, and it was like, which one do you pick? I was just like, Hawk. Bye, Hawk. Saving Alistair.
And polishes, and it's still vitally important that you're using teamwork. The first draft of this scene, I wrote this, but the first draft did not have enough romance branching. It did not have enough specific content for players who romance Soulless. And our editor, Corey May, a.k.a. Soulless Mancer Prime, not only edited, but provided specific feedback. And at one point, I just told her, look, just write what will make you saddest, and then we'll say that I wrote it. Just write something that will make you cry. It's also worth calling out that another writer, Brianne Batty, she, while not hating Soulless, she said, look, it's important that players who don't care about Soulless have the option to have him start to give his big explanation and then say, Soulless, have I ever wanted to hear one of your big talks? No, never. And so Brienne is the reason we have that option in there. Even when the vision is on target, these little tweaks and these efforts from the team help bring it to 100%.
It's worth noting that any time I did work on the romance part of the scene, I would put it past Corey and say, is this making you cry more? If the answer was yes, fantastic. So that's vision. Now, because we had a specific vision early on, we didn't really need to go as deep into critique and revision. But even if you have the strongest vision in the world, sometimes you will need to go into critique and revision. And as an example?
So here is the Exalted Council finale. If talking to Soulless is the climax of the Trespasser DLC, this is the denouement. Our vision for this was, if you remember Captain America, the Winter Soldier, after all the explosions are done, Natasha Romanoff, aka the Black Widow, faces a congressional hearing where a lot of senators have some very tough questions for her about S.H.I.E.L.D. That was the emotional inspiration we were going for. We wanted a bunch of politicians to be asking you tough questions about the Inquisition.
That you have no insight into.
We also knew this was going to be one of the toughest...
I was going to say about the... it's like these people, once again, have forgotten about the Grey Wardens, because like the Inquisition, the Grey Wardens they are specific to a certain task, you know? And the Grey Wardens have keeps all over the place. They have keeps in Olay, they have keeps now in Ferelden. I know they got kicked out of Ferelden for a reason, but anyway, they got a keep in Ferelden now. They got keeps in, they got places all around the other. These people can operate with other groups, fine. And it's just like, the Inquisition needs to be disbanded. Why? If other groups can exist borderless because they are dedicated towards a certain task, you know? It's not like again, the Inquisition never held any actual land. It's not like you were seizing, let's say, Redcliffe Castle, because let's say the guy went off and did his own thing, and then you took it over, and you were like, well, you ran away from your people, now we're seizing it, and now we're restoring order. You know, there's none of that.
Yeah, and we're going to see some options and choices that make the whole idea of Inquisition, or the game rather, moot. Because of the customization, or the 6 options that they give you, and we'll see it next. But it's just like, who cares? They're focusing on drama when they should be focusing on logic and what the story was about, as opposed to, does it make you really sad when you choose this option? Does it make you prideful of not choose? It's like, who cares? It doesn't make any sense.
Scenes, because you were making a choice here, the choice between disbanding the Inquisition, an organization that you started and now lead, or keeping it but still seeing its power curtailed and losing a lot of its autonomy. In both of these cases, you're giving up power, and when you want the player to give up power, you need it to still feel like a win. You need it to still feel like something the player goes, okay, I come to this with a sense of pride. I come to this with a sense of ownership. So in our first draft, how did we do with pride and ownership? There it is. The critique every writer loves to see. So I aimed for pride and ownership as the feelings I wanted to invoke. How did I do? No. Here's what went wrong. If you look at the start here, you come into the Exalted Council meeting, and you have a bunch of politicians going back and forth. In the first draft, what you got was a single choice that let you say disband the Inquisition or keep the Inquisition. After you make your choice, there would be a couple lines.
Sorry, it's because someone's in the chat that just reminded me about the whole Mage Rebellion. Like, what happened to that? Are the mages going back to the towers? Are they becoming autonomous? What's going on here? You know, this was actually a large thing in Dragon Age Inquisition. It was one of the catalysts, really, for the chaos of the world or whatever. And yet it never gets touched upon ever again. It's like, what's going on there? Like, if you know, and if the Inquisition just becomes the honor guard of the divine, then technically they are just becoming the Templars again.
Yeah, no, it's a major theme in the second game. They sort of kind of dealt with it in the third game, but it's just a thing. It's as if it's sort of passed over. It's like, oh yeah, there are mages and you can recruit them, or not. It's like, yeah, okay. You're gonna involve them. Like, this is a big war between a huge magical creature and his dragon, and demons coming out. I think we might need some mages. That might be kind of important. What happened to them? I don't know.
Lines of dialogue that were always the same, and then I would make you. Then I would let you make another choice that let you say whether you were proud, angry, sad about your choice. Am I keeping the Inquisition and I'm proud of its accomplishments, or am I disbanding the Inquisition and I'm angry about what has happened and the politicians getting in my way? That's what I wrote. But here is what our playtesters saw. All they saw was, I've played the game for somewhere northwards of 50 to 100 hours, and the fate of my organization comes down to a simple binary choice with no emotion attached to it?
Well,
What the?
he's also forgot the 2-year time skip that never actually addressed the whole curtailing of the Inquisition's power. So it's like you got all this information, you got all this history that you've just pole vaulted over and kind of gone, yep, you're now here.
You know, there's no context as to what it means to keep and disband. It's just like, I declare it to be disbanded because I feel angry or prideful. It's like, that's not how you make decisions in life. You don't say, I feel sad, therefore I want to give the Inquisition to Ferelden. You're like, why?
Yeah. And I think that this is actually one of, like, Mass Effect was trying to be the whole decisions influence the next story, so on and so forth. It failed, really. It only worked in certain parts. Dragon Age should not be trying to do what Mass Effect's trying to do. It shouldn't be trying to pick up that. It should just be localized stories within different sectors. I want to go to Navarre. I want to go to Devinter. I want to go to Kirkwall and all these different places. But I want the story just to be within those locations. I don't want the choices of Ferelden to have any influence over Kirkwall, because that's just, I want that story to be focused within that one thing. You know, I'm getting a bit tired of the whole world changing events, because it just makes most of your choices moot, or a simple kind of cameo. Hey, Alistair, you're a Grey Warden. Hey, Alistair, you're the king. And that's it. That's all what you're going to get out of it. And so I just see there's no point. Just me personally, sorry.
What? This is not satisfying. This does not respect the player's motivation. And then, once they made that choice, it turns out that disbanding the Inquisition, I wrote it well, and players said, okay, that actually feels pretty strong. But keeping the Inquisition, the critique I got on my first draft was, it sounds like you're trying to have the Inquisitor say, no major changes, and that just never sounds badass. It is impossible for no major changes to sound good.
Sure it can be. Why not? You can do all sorts of wonderful things of having hardening or negative character growth. It's still change. It's like, I believe in everything I've always believed in. I'm not changing, and I'm actually being more passionate about it. That's totally acceptable. Now, how they did it, I don't know. He's talking about first draft, so maybe it was really bad. I have no idea.
So we took that feedback. I took that feedback. To be clear, this was my scene personally, and we rewrote it. Here's what we did. The first thing we did is we took, instead of the choice going from 2 and then you eventually split each of those 2 into 3 possible tones, we loaded the choice right there onto the wheel, so that whether you were disbanding or keeping the Inquisition, you could see that you were going to have the ability to do it on your terms. I'm keeping the Inquisition, but I'm reluctant, and
You literally did nothing except remove the first choice. You just, like... We went from 2 dialogue wheels to 1 dialogue wheel. Wow, great difference.
I'm sad about the tragedy of realizing that we have overreached. Or I'm disbanding the Inquisition, but I am proud of our work, and I'm going to go out with my head held high. This gave players the sense of pride and ownership. We also rewrote the entirety. We ended up rewriting all 6 paths. That was me, John Epler, and Mike Laidlaw, our creative director. We sat down at a desk and we wrote all 6 paths into what we were thinking of as mini epic speeches, each of which could give you a sense of pride and ownership. And that got us to what we eventually shipped, which our players were happy with and did find satisfying.
Of course they did. Of course they did. They're players. Everything's amazing.
You know what's really funny is that Dragon Age Origins epilogue is really, really good, because it does so much. Because if, let's say, for example, you're an elf and you sacrifice yourself, you don't take Morrigan's offer or anything like that, and you make Alistair king, what does he do? He goes, I'm going to give the elves their own plot of land, despite the racial tensions, and he starts to build upon that. It's like, that's good. It's just this, they're just trying to have this one that you click a button and then, I hate to say this, but you're going to click a button and you're going to get something awesome out of it, rather than having your choices accumulated together and then reflected upon the ending, which is what BioWare typically do.
I think because the expression is just a sentence in the epilogue or a paragraph, that it's easier for them to argue about and agree upon, as opposed to rewriting and redoing dialogue and then saying, okay, now we need a cutscene, and there's all these soups in the kitchen. So yeah, the epilogue in the first Dragon Age was like great because it tracked all the choices you made and what factions did what. So
Yeah,
simple
that's
is
all
good.
what players. That's all what players want in a BioWare game. I think this is one of the reasons why I hate to bring up the ME3 ending again, because that's like flipping Chernobyl right now. But that's where BioWare made the mistake. That's where they deviated from their standard formula, whereby you have all these choices and then the epilogue happens and you kind of go, oh, right, that's what happened. And then you get a nice little blurb. You get like a couple of cutscenes saying, this happened and this happened. And then, of course, you get like the B-roll, not the B-roll, but, the blurb roll where they have a little paragraph that says to the minor things. You kind of go, oh, that's nice.
Well, the choices were so bad. It's like, oh, now
Yeah.
everyone's green. Here's the expression of everyone being green. Oh my God.
Despite all my efforts, I was unable to get off my plane anywhere in there, so. But I tried. The other problem we had with the end was not just with the end, but also with the DLC as a whole, and that was there's a lot of missing links. Teagan's arguments came off as petty. He shows up at the beginning, dumps a bunch of info on you, shows up at the end, and is basically a giant jerk. So we needed him to have justified concerns. He needed a reason to want you to disband the Inquisition. We never really gave him one. And we had multiple threads in this DLC. We had catch up with your friends. We had one last grand adventure. We had the Exalted Council. Nothing was really tying them together. We needed to connect those beats in a way that was more satisfying and, to a player, made more sense. So what did we do? Well, with Teagan was the first one. We gave him a lot more screen time. He started off with 2 beats, shows up, dumps some info on you, shows up at the end, and is an unreasonable jerk. And then we gave him 5. He shows up at the beginning, does a bunch of other stuff throughout the DLC, and also we showed through the gameplay, through the level, that your Inquisition was doing things without your authorization. They were acting autonomously, and honestly in a fashion that was pretty corrupt. So he went to just right reasonable jerk instead of unreasonable jerk.
Why wasn't this in the main game? Like, if you were seizing land, if you were claiming land that was other people's, then Teagan would actually have a reason to actually hate. People would have a reason to hate the Inquisition, or at least, kind of be against it.
Well, this
like, you've overstayed your welcome and things like that.
Right. That would have been good as a plot point, but because there's the time skip, it's implied that a lot of things have happened since then, and we can see the effects of that. So this is actually not a bad way of doing it, because there was a time skip. If he didn't come up and say, "Oh yeah, everything's great, you guys are okay. Can you please go away now because we don't need you?" Like that would have been that would have been kind of lame. So it's kind of like, hey, let's have this massive bureaucracy that you're in charge of that just happens to be doing things by itself, and you're unaware of it. It's like, oh, that doesn't sound good. So
that's where the other DLCs could have actually worked. They could have been within that 2-year time. And then it's like, then you see could drop hints of the Inquisition's corruption throughout that,
That would have been nice, but the thing is, we needed a person. We needed like, how Josephine is sort of like the person that does all the diplomacy. They needed like a second Josephine, or like a ersatz or smaller version of Josephine that sort of like does all the dirty work. It's kind of like a mix between Josephine and Liliana. They're like, she's underhanded and she gets dirt, like she does the things that doesn't come up to you because she thinks she can take care of it. Like that sort of character who's not bad, but she's taking more responsibility and not telling anyone. Like that would have worked, because then you could say, no, it's her fault, and then you'd have this wonderful dialogue. Because if you just have one guy saying everything's screwed up now, you're like, says who? I mean, it's just you. I'm the guy in charge. Blah 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 blah. Why do I care? So you have to personify these hurdles, especially when they're diplomatic, because you can't just say, look at all the land, it's on fire, this is your fault. It's like, okay, yeah, maybe. But if it's like, no, the land is on fire because I said so, it's not really, I don't really believe you.
Fight his fears. We showed you that power does corrupt. And so for the various beats we had, we needed to make the transition from fun times to dire threat a lot cleaner than it was. Right now you have 3 competing plot threads. Let's combine them into one. So the dead Qunari shows up at the Exalted Council. Suddenly you have a clean transition from have fun with your friends. You click on that door and we explicitly tell you this will start the Exalted Council. There will be no more time for hanging out with your buddies. And then once you're in there, one of your scouts shows up and says, hey, there's a dead Qunari outside. And you, being the player and being a protagonist, decide, you know what, all this political stuff is boring. I'm going to go punch some people because that's what I do. Never mind that you are the Inquisitor at this point. And a bonus of this is this does give Teagan even more justification because you just basically turned your back on 3 of the most powerful people in the entirety of this part of Thedas. You've told them that, you know what, all this stuff about my organization is less important than me stabbing a guy in the face. So,
Well, that could be a boon because you're actually doing things while they keep talking. So it's like, I'm the guy who does shit. You guys sit and talk about this and that. I'm going to go keep ourselves from being killed. So I like the fact that he did point out that he combined plot threads. It's a very good idea. You don't want this is the frickin' DLC to do that, to clean up the plot threads in the previous game. So if you're going to make a new plot to do that, you're not going to make more threads. So at least they're learning. Good on you.
Now, actually, John used this slide, and there's an interesting little bonus you get when you have a strong vision and when you're using a critique and revision process that allows you to get closer to that vision. This is the Elven Servant. She's the one who points out the original draft. This wasn't in our first crack at this. It came out organically, and the way it came out was actually as a result of us using critique and revision. When you're doing these changes and going, okay, we're trying to get to Raiders of the Lost Ark meets Captain America Winter Soldier. How are we going to get there? How are we going to use this? Well, it turns out
It's funny.
that we realized as we were fixing other stuff, as we were adding an additional scene here, as we were adding an additional moment there, we realized that, well, again, to take Captain America the Winter Soldier, I'm not sure how many people can quote note for note Computer Guy's speech about how Hydra has infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D. and has been present all throughout S.H.I.E.L.D.'s history. But what can everyone say? What 2 words can everybody say about Captain America the Winter Soldier that let you know that S.H.I.E.L.D. has been corrupted? Hail Hydra. There we go. Yeah. Hail Hydra. This gives us our Hail Hydra moment. People have a hard time getting attached to big, long speeches, but a character is an easy source of emotional reference, and that's what players can glom onto. Having a character let us do that a lot more easily, and it was something that, again, we got in the process of fixing other problems because we had a strong vision. We had an emotional reference that we were going for.
This is very good, but he's missing the forest for the trees. He's talking about drama again. He's not talking about personifying the problem and simplifying the expression of that idea into a catchphrase like the Hail Hydra. So he's right. He's saying the right things. He's just talking about it in the wrong way.
So that's vision, critique, and revision. Ideally, this gets you where you need to be, but even with a strong vision, that step is the most important. You need to repeat this because every time you go down that path, sometimes you're going to take a wrong turn. For example,
the Deep Roads. Now, in a possible example of foreshadowing, the Deep Roads did not have a strong vision. What we had was a great palette, an art palette, the underground dwarven area. We thought it was fun. We hadn't used it a ton in Inquisition, and we wanted to use it more. We wanted to have the Qunari present. They were present at the end of our first dungeon. Our first dungeon, we use dungeon exchangeably just to mean a combat area that doesn't have a ton of talking and is a fairly linear experience. So this was our second dungeon area. It was supposed to establish the Qunari as a threat, and it was supposed to amp up the tension. Now, realistically, the only thing you do in the Dwarven Deep Roads is mine lyrium, which is our magical mineral in the Dragon Age universe. So we said, okay, so the Qunari are probably mining lyrium. Hopefully that's enough of a hook. It wasn't. It turned out that the dungeon had fantastic gameplay. It was really, really fun to play, but it didn't make sense. The Qunari didn't have a great reason to be in that dungeon mining lyrium, and what was worse, they didn't connect to the overall story. At the start of the dungeon, you knew that the Qunari were a problem doing something bad, and at the end of the dungeon, you knew that the Qunari were a problem doing something bad.
You see, the problem here is, I talked about this with you previously, is that they're writing the story second. They're talking about a dungeon, they're talking about enemies. It's like, what are you doing? Why are they there? You don't know why you put Qunaris in your level? You haven't explained. Like, it's bizarre. Like, they're making a game first and then putting a story on top. This should be the exact opposite.
Yeah, I think I know they're talking about the DLC and what have you, but referring back to the first game, that could have actually been the Qunari could have actually been the driving force as to why you need to get the Inquisition going, because you let's say it's again like what happened in Kirkwall. If you don't solve your own problems, the Qunari will. And with all these rifts opening up in across, Orlais and Ferelden and a few other places, the Qunari are going to be like, listen, we're going to solve this problem with or without you. We're going to solve it. So get your act together, or we're going to invade. And you're like, you know, there's your motivation, because that's what they're all about. They're all about that whole. Oh, they're like Cassandra on meth, on the restoring order sense of things. Like, and plus, well, they're fairly alien in their way of thinking. Really, when you look at Sten, like the way how he reacted when he lost his sword, killed an entire family. Just because he lost his sword.
No, it's a very unique. The Qunari have always been very interesting in the storylines, and to not use them very as much as they could have in the second game, it's kind of like, you're missing out on a lot of culture, and it's good that they brought them back. And I actually like what they've done. They could have done a lot, like they're going to talk about it right now, but it's kind of interesting how they got to that point.
There was no rising tension, and that was a real problem. We needed to explain what they were doing a lot more clearly, and we need to give them a reason to be in that mine gathering lyrium.
So one of the things we do is what's called tension graphing. Now, this is an arbitrary set of numbers. You take your beats of your story and you graph them out relative to each other. Now, orange is the deep roads. The problem is we had low tension, low tension, low tension, low tension. All of a sudden, you're fighting the Qunari leader and everything's going crazy. So we decided, no, you know what? We need to take the deep roads and up the baseline so the tension rises more gradually, because to a player, an experience that's satisfying is when that tension slowly goes up.
I think what he means by baseline is stakes. And to not describe that, it looks like a dramatic structure, but he's just ascribing random numbers. And I'm like, you don't do that with any structure. You don't just put a 2 over here and a 9 over there. It's like, what is a 2 mean? How many stakes are there? Are they personal stakes? Are they plot stakes? Are they some other character stakes? Is it the stake of the world? Like, what's the intensity? What's the scope of these stakes? You can't just put random numbers and go, okay, next scene's going to be 5. The scene after that's going to be 6. It's like, no, what are you doing? Tell us why tell us why we're in the deep roads. Explain the connections. Explain the symbolism. What the hell's going on after? This is not how you write drama. This is not how you write a plot. This is it's wishy-washy. It's just this is a 7. Okay.
Then there was the writing side of it. And for
What the hell was the other side of it? The mathematical side of it?
anyone who has played this piece of DLC, please bear with me. So we thought about it. And we said, okay, what do the Qunari hate? Magic. They want to suppress magic. In the Dragon Age universe, the best way to suppress magic is with the organization called the Templars. So what if the Qunari were making Templars? Okay, that makes sense. Now, the only way to make Templars in the Dragon Age setting is to use lyrium, the magical mineral. So what if the Qunari were mining lyrium to make Templars? This actually works. This could bind the IP together. This could help things make sense. We added an information giver, a former Templar. We put him in the middle of the dungeon, and we thought, okay, he's going to explain that the Qunari are here mining lyrium to make Templars so that they can suppress our mages when they invade the south. This is going to make the whole DLC better. Or not.
I was going to say.
It could have. I mean, it depends how you do it.
Well, it's this whole idea of, well, what did the Qunari do before Templars? Because they never had any Templars, and obviously they dealt with their own mages perfectly fine for hundreds of years. So why would they need to be making Templars unless they were making humans serve it? They had their serve. I would actually really call them serfs, I suppose. They're human serfs and elven serfs, and they were turning them into Templars, into anti-magic users.
Right.
That would be interesting.
Yeah, I'm saying the idea itself, there's no real horrible ideas unless by design. It's like, how, let's say, they wanted to turn dwarves into Templars. but dwarves can't be Templars. Like, imagine they wanted to do that. That wouldn't make sense. But
Yeah, because they've got a natural resistance to
exactly,
Lyria.
exactly. So if they wanted
yeah,
to
I
make
think that.
themselves Templars, it'd be like, okay, that could work. I don't see why not. It's how you do it.
As it turns out, this took a ton of explanation.
Why? You just say, look, we're going to make some Templars out of Qunari. They're stronger, they're bigger, they can do it.
And when the playtesters played, the playtesters being BioWare employees working on this project, they played this and said, okay, that was a lot of words, and I still don't really know what the Qunari are doing.
Really? How dumb are your playtesters? My God. Okay, you got Templars, you got Qunari, and the Qunari want to be Templars. They're going to take Lyrium to do that. That's it, right? Got it.
So that was super bad. On top of it, we didn't have any Templars in this piece of DLC in a major way until now. So trying to add Templars...
The guy you wrote into the dungeon to explain things you specifically made him to go there. Okay, maybe you couldn't write him very well. That's not the fault of the idea. It's the fault of the writer.
Templars to a story that already had the Qunari using magical mirrors to smuggle explosives into the political centers of Thedas and Ferelden in order to destabilize the area while you deal with political intrigue, your own governmental overreach, the worsening effects of the mark on your hand, and ancient elven mythology was possibly...
Your hand's actually hurting you now? Oh, wow.
You see,
Never knew that in Dragon Age.
All these ideas could have worked fine. It doesn't matter how convoluted, so long as it's expressed properly and the mystery of why things are happening gets slowly revealed. So they could have the most ingenious plot of setting up bombs and doing all these things, and while they're secretly stealing lyrium and turning people into Templars. Nothing wrong with that.
Adding too many pieces.
Well, lyrium is also a source of magic, so... if they wanted to get rid of mages, not necessarily mages, but the mage's main power source, then yeah, as people are pointing out in the chat, they would actually be destroying Lyrium. Interesting, So.
Yeah, there's many ways they could have taken this, and it could be as deep and complex as they've wanted, so long as it's expressed well. That's all it is. It's you have these motives within motives and plans within plans, and that's it. What do you think Soulless is doing? He was the same way. He's like, I'm an elf. I like exploring the Fade. Oh, look, I'm really a god. Like, what? And he happened to have an infiltrator in your Inquisition all this time. Whoa, where'd that come from? I can't understand that. How did that happen? Like, what do you do? It's confusing. Explain it. We're not teaching someone trigonometry here. We're just things happen. And how did they happen? This way. Okay.
It's like the trickster god is tricking me. Wow.
Whoa. Didn't see that one.
To an already complex narrative. We needed something a lot simpler. We needed something that worked with the gameplay we had, because if you remember, the gameplay was what worked right in the first draft. So we took out the Templar stuff. It didn't make sense. What did make sense was the Serabas. Now, a Serabas is a Qunari mage. They were introduced in the Deep Roads dungeon as the end enemy of this level. And they were fun, and they were fun to fight. The Serabas are suppressed, like all mages in the Qunari culture. And by adding this in, we could say, okay, this actually makes sense. They're ordinarily suppressed. They could use lyrium. So if we take the lyrium that the Qunari are mining, and they take the lyrium and they give it to their Serabas, they're making super weapons.
This is a fine idea, but again, they could have had another enemy type with a Qunari Templar and different gameplay mechanics and how you fight them. So,
yeah, they could have actually had like a kind of symbiotic one. They have the Templar and the mage, and if you kill the Templar, then the mage kind of goes more batshit.
Like he would have been like his master to control them, and he has the delirium on a leash and all that stuff. That would have worked.
And then you kill the leader. Yeah, you kill the controller, and then that just starts attacking them random. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, so they could actually add it to this concept where they take the elements that didn't work and say, okay, let's explain it and make a gameplay element out of it as well, and that would have been fine.
They're taking people who have been parched and dying of thirst their whole life and hooking them up to a fire hose to make them powerful. This is, by any measurable standard, a really bad idea for the Qunari, but that is the kind of short-term gain, long-term loss, dangerous deal with the devil that characters in the Dragon Age universe make all the time. When we added that, we got to a point where we were happy with that dungeon and the story worked as well as the narrative, as well as the gameplay did.
It's worth noting that Patrick, though he likes to jump on the grenade of the Qunari Templars, that was a 45-minute discussion where we were convinced that we'd made everything in the IP tie together in some intricate, majestic way.
It was mostly my fault, though.
So a note is be wary of 45-minute discussions because you can make any idea sound good if you talk about it for 45 minutes.
So that's our process. Vision, critique, revision. That is what gets us from our first draft to something that we are proud to show our players. When you have a vision, when you have a clear goal, that gives you a target. It gives you something that everyone on the team can look at as the same result, as the thing they are going for. And when they are critiquing, it gives them a point of articulation that works better than, oh, I don't know, this didn't just work for me, or risk of personal attacks or offense. It gives you a terms that you can use to argue intelligently. And it gives you grounds for less iteration to take from your first draft to your final draft.
And critique is hugely important. It takes useful feedback and it takes place in a secure, confident environment. As Patrick said, it avoids personal attacks. It gets to the root of why it's not working.
It's not working because you're morons. Forget, he's too personal. Well, yeah, I'm going to be objective, and then I'm going to call you a moron, and they're going to motivate you to not be a moron. That's just me, but, I've gone through some pretty brutal critiques in creative writing. So toughen up, Buttercup, come on.
Notes both problems, and importantly, it notes strong things that you're already doing. If you have a moment that is really working, you want to build a critique in a way that addresses the problems but also supports the things that are already there. And it moves your project closer to the vision that you've established already.
So revision. Strong iteration takes you closer to the vision. That is its goal. And because it is not a random change, because you are moving towards a goal rather than just away from something that it doesn't work, there's a good chance that it's going to be kinder to your scope and your schedule. It's going to be kinder to your timeline. It's targeted changes for a targeted result. And most importantly, when those changes come in, you can test them to see if they work, to see if they do what you want and do get you closer to the goal. And if they don't, you can change them back or change them to something better. If I could offer one final takeaway here, I would note that we are all creative. Everyone in this room has more ideas than you're ever going to be able to fit into any of the games we work on. And because of that, we think of ideas as sacred and we think of ideas as important, and they are. They are precious. But they might not be right for what you're working on. An idea is only useful to the game you're on, to the content you're on, if it moves you closer to that vision. It's never worth undercutting the core vision of your project.
And you should listen to your experts and your testers. We have a large variety of viewpoints, of experiences on our project. There's a saying I really like. It's, if you want to make carve an elephant out of marble, you start with a block of marble and take out everything that doesn't look like an elephant. And these viewpoints, this feedback, that's the stuff that doesn't look like the elephant. That's the stuff that doesn't look like your vision.
Go into every project celebrating, rejoicing, proud of the fact that you are going to make mistakes. Making mistakes and going into revision is not a sign of weakness. Revising is a sign of confidence. It's a sign that you care enough to make your project better instead of insisting that your first draft was perfect.
Isn't this what most writers tell you in the first place? Is like, you look at Neil Gaiman, and is it Gaiman? He basically says that your first draft's going to suck, but your second draft is the one where you pretend that you knew what you're doing all along.
Well, this is all fine. They're talking about iterations, so this is all good. And,
I'm just being a git.
Yeah, no. This is like I like this pretty much the end of the movie or end of the video, but the process that they showed us was pretty good. The end results and how they got there and the things they threw out, it's kind of like, okay, well, maybe they were just pressed for time and they didn't want to confuse people, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with simplifying and clarifying. It's to learn that they've done the gameplay first and designed enemies a certain way, and then they have to like, oh, we have to explain why the Qunari are so strong. It's like, what? That
Yeah.
that doesn't. That's not even a writing thing. That's like doing game design backwards. That's you come up with an idea for a level. You say this is going to be an underground level because we're chasing after someone like a dwarf or whatever, and there's some lyrium and it's underground. That's why you find it there. It's in the deep roads. It's like, oh, okay, and you go from there. This is like, oh, we're fighting Qunari. Why? We don't know yet. It doesn't make any sense. So I don't like just to know about that, like that aspect of game design or writing for game design is backwards. And it's horrible to hear that.
But it's not even like they had to turn the Qunari into those things. They have a wide range of creatures that they could have actually introduced new creatures, let's say, that the Qunari use that are more magically imbued or something, or forcibly magically imbued. You know, like, and that's basically being like, round hole square pegging this, but they could have done a lot more rather than just kind of going, no, we need to turn the Qunari into something. It's like, well, you don't really have to.
Well, it's interesting because this is like a secondary opponent. The primary component were the elves or Soulless, and the Qunari are sort of like this. They get caught up in stuff, and it's like, well, they're not the real enemy. It's kind of like in Mass Effect 2, it's the collectors. It's like they're not the real. They're just sort of the mooks, right? So, but they're the ones you end up fighting. So it's like, okay, you have to get them to be relevant. And I actually liked what they did, like the design of the female Qunari. She had the book attached to her arm, like it was like this guiding principle, and they had to eliminate magic and all this crap. So they got the general ideas done and done well. And we could certainly argue that the DLC was much better by far than the main game. And this is what I'm really pissed off at, because it's like they had this capacity to do things in a smaller, tighter way if they just had to sit down and talk about it. And they never did till after the fact the game came out. And that's why I'm like, what the hell were you doing? How can you go from Saturday morning cartoon Mr. Claw to one of your best friends is now your enemy? It's like, why didn't you do that in the first place?
I think, this is what, I guess when people sort of mean BioWare needs to go back to the roots, I think it means they need to go back to a smaller, more manageable budget with limited but reachable goals. And I think, and I'm actually seeing this with every single major game that they released, whether it be, like Mass Effect 3, Andromeda, and now obviously Anthem, and obviously Inquisition included this one. They always seem to be wanting to strike. They want to hit that home run and smash it out, and they never can do it. They can't strike that one-hit wonder that they got with Mass Effect 2. And they keep trying to hit it.
And I think if they focus on what they're good at, which is hopefully storytelling anyway, or whatever they're good at these days, if they actually had writers who figured stuff out way before they even touched code, way before they touched the game engine, and said, okay, we're going to tell a story like this. Here's our dramatic arcs and characters and character changes. And then they go to the developer and say, hey, can we do stuff like that? And he'd be like, yeah, no problem. We've done that in Mass Effect 1. It's no big deal. Or we did that in Dragon Age 2. Great. Let's do that. And then they all make that thing that they envisioned well before they decided to play around with levels and enemies. And it's like, what is going? It's backwards. And I'm not saying you can't make a game like that, because obviously they did. But it's like getting the car in motion before the wheels are secured. It's not planning to put gas in the vehicle before you think you already have some. It's very backwards thinking.
But this was actually a thing that affected Mass Effect 1's development. They were actually they didn't have any ideas for like a lot of things. Like they literally had writers going back and forth. Like they went like, we've got this new level, and do you want mind writing it for us? So I think it might just be an intrinsic thing with BioWare that ever since they tried to become a AAA company, they are literally building the train tracks as the train's coming along.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen Wallace and Gromit?
Yes, of course.
Have you ever seen The Wrong Trousers where Gromit gets out the train tracks? And he's
Pulls them
just
out and puts them down. Yeah, it takes them.
yeah, that's basically how Bioware do game design, pretty much. You know, they are literally just hammering that thing out, praying that they don't run out of track before they hit the wall.
Yeah, that's more applicable to their current game, where they're sort of building content as they're launched themselves. So,
Yeah.
but hey, that was interesting. I'm glad I got a chance to see that. I believe it was one of my patrons recommended that, and I do appreciate that. And it makes for good
Watch
discussion.
yourself.
Yeah, I mean, game design, game development, the process for literary criticism inside of that, how that works, I think is very interesting. And there's of course many ways to skin a cat. So this was always a enlightening process of telling a story that is actually decent for a game that was not so decent. And it gives me a lot of understanding of how Dragon Age, or at least BioWare, does their process. So, thanks guys for watching. I do appreciate all your time and patience with going through this. And if you have any suggestions on what we should cover next, I'm always open to them. And have yourself a great day.